So like, how good is Donkey Kong Country actually? For the longest time, I always associated his character with being banished to the B team of Mario. You know, he'll always be there whenever there's a party or race going on, but he wasn't cool enough to actually be a part of the mainline games. But it turns out I was dead wrong, and the dude actually has a full-fledged line of 2D platformers available across multiple Nintendo consoles. So in the spirit of Donkey Kong December... Fuck! So in the spirit of Kong Jong January, I'm gonna marathon all 5 country games in a row to see how they stack up compared to his Red Plumber counterparts and his lineup of 2D games. Donkey Kong Country gives off a very interesting first impression. After the opening credits where Donkey Kong knocks out an elderly man, the game sort of just plops you into the first level and doesn't give you any plot or story to get behind. And it's weird, I thought we'd get some sort of explanation as to what's going on, since other SNES games give us like 2 sentences of exposition at least, but here, nah, they ain't telling you shit. So instead of the plot, my first real impression I can gather from this game is just how good it looks for being so old. Like, there's a specific nostalgia you get for classic games that are made in pixel art, but right from the get-go, Donkey Kong's graphics felt so different from anything I've ever played. The character models have a sharp edge to it that make it pop out from the backgrounds and platforms, almost like one of those pop-up picture books where certain drawings are taking up more of the foreground and have a different texture to it than anything else. These visuals made me so curious that I did something I usually never do and actually did some research to see how they made the game look like this. I'll spare a lot of the details, but Rare Studios opted to make the character models using pre-rendered 3D silicon graphics, in which they had to build and rig the characters entirely in 3D before converting them into 2D animation, something that was literally never done for any other video game out during that era, and the developers were expected to learn how to make them in a short amount of time, which seems impossible and kinda dicey, but nowadays those risky decisions made for one of the most distinct looking video games I've ever seen, and it looks like something so out of the mainstream and made by some really talented indie studio. But nah, it was made for this stupid looking ape. So actually getting into the game now, I was quite surprised to find out that there's no specific gimmick or feature that makes Donkey Kong stand out as a 2D platformer. This shocked me because the gaming industry was dominated by the genre back then, and it felt as though every IP had to have something different going on so they don't just rip off Mario. Like take Sonic or Kirby for example. Sonic runs really fast, and Kirby gives sensational head. Both have completely unique mechanics, so someone who's first playing the game can realize how they spice up the platformer genre. But when I played this game, I kept coming back to how Donkey Kong doesn't have that it factor. Aside from a couple minor details that I'll get into later, the creators said they took a lot of inspiration from Mario World, and it definitely shows. So why is this game considered one of the best 2D platformers of all time then? Honestly speaking, this part of the marathon kinda stumped me because I didn't know how to clearly explain what this game does different, and I had huge writer's block for a while. But eventually, I realized that I was looking at this game all wrong. And what makes Donkey Kong Country so beloved is not for what it does differently, but for how it perfects the basics of a 2D platformer. For example, how easy it is to control Donkey Kong and Diddy. Of course, you got your jumps and your grabbing, which again works a lot like Mario World, but completely unique to this game, we got rolling. And for such a simple technique, it's surprisingly effective throughout a playthrough, since rolling is not only an easy way to defeat enemies without having to pinpoint and jump and risk dying, but also you gain a lot of speed and momentum. And going into a roll at a perfect time lets you access some crazy heights at a quick pace. Perfecting rolling can make your life way easier for this game, which you will need, and can give Donkey Kong Country an interesting Cuphead connection, since one simple move can be game changers. One thing I will note is throughout the SNES trilogy, jumping feels kinda awkward. I don't know if I've been spoiled by how jumping feels in Mario games, but here I always felt like it was a bit too stiff, and I would find myself not making the jumps I wanted, which does make rolling a good alternative, but until the later half of the Country series, this awkwardness was always there. But aside from the moveset, something that is always given lots of praise when it comes to this franchise is the level design. And yeah, I definitely see the appeal of it. They are tough, but very satisfying to complete, and the lack of a timer allows you to go at your own pace, so you're free to explore each level to your heart's content and not weighed down by some external factor. And Rare was pretty creative with how they're able to create so many uses for enemies and especially barrels. God damn, someone at Rare really loves these things, and it shows with how many unique barrels you can find in this game. The levels also pride themselves on their secrets as well, which should be a fun aspect since it brings a lot of replay value in trying to find the secret Kong letters or the secret rooms, and can have a lot more variety to them compared to the key finding in Mario World. However, I did say should, since, oh god, I was already complaining about how some of the secret exits in Mario World felt too obscure, but DKC takes that to an entire new level. Take this level right here. It may not seem like it, but there's a secret lurking around here, and if you guessed, waiting for the stupid bird to fly towards you and jumping on it and landing in the top left side corner, you'd be correct! These levels require an insane amount of awareness to find everything, which for some people I can see as a big selling point, and others would find too time consuming. And I lie somewhere in the middle of that. Because once I replay those levels to find those secrets, I realize that the levels are kinda hit or miss for me. On one hand, we got some very unique courses like Stop and Go Station and Tanked Up Trouble, but then we also got levels like Torchlight Trouble, where we have these stupid oil cans which are impossible to get over unless you make some super precise jumps, or you deliberately take hits to use your invincibility frames. And Donkey Kong Country would most often reuse the lame ideas rather than the cool ones. Even when it comes to those less than stellar levels, there is one common quality to Donkey Kong Country that is universally agreed upon within the fandom, and that would happen to be the music. Oh my god, Beethoven doesn't have shit on Donkey Kong. It isn't immediate though. Even though the intro and the world map themes are really good, when you enter the first level of the game, you hear nothing. At first, you start to hear a faint bass in the background, and then slowly you hear the drums as well, and the trumpets, and more instruments I don't know the name of. And it's not until you're a minute in when you hear the full extent of Jungle Hijinks, which is not only a fantastic song, but also does a perfect job at setting the tone of the first level and the entire game. And how for beginners, they start off innocent and unaware of what to expect, and so the game will replicate that and slowly ease them into the madness they'll get into later. To the point where even Donkey Kong Country's water levels are actually good. Sorta decent and not super annoying, which is saying a lot since most water levels fall into the dog shit category. Every one of these are stunning. The pixelated background and the 3D foreground meshes super well here. These levels are pretty claustrophobic but have diverging pathways, and although the enemies can be kind of annoying, the music here is what sticks everything together. You're able to take in and appreciate the soothing ambience as you drift through the deep blue sea. The music can sound quite ominous sometimes because of how mysterious the ocean can be, but also represents how relaxing and how beautiful it can be as well, and makes you forget all the stresses and worries you have in your life as you listen to the simple yet soul-inspiring synthesizer that makes for one of the most soothing pieces you'll ever hear. Which is insane because this is in a game that's about a monkey trying to get his bananas back. Look, I am probably not the best guy to ask when it comes to explaining why the music here is so good. My musical knowledge is very limited. I played piano back when I was 8 for a couple months, and I wasn't that good at it. But if you haven't played Donkey Kong and still don't plan on playing it after watching this video, I implore you to at least listen to the soundtrack. You won't regret it. By the way, I mentioned the music a lot in this video to the point where you can make a drinking game out of it. So my friend here is gonna take a shot every time I talk about it, so play along if you dare. You also come to appreciate how much personality is given to our main characters, Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, but not in how they speak. Literally, since they don't speak at all. But instead, they show this through their animations and movements. Back in the 90s, a big thing that Sonic had going for him was how cool and charismatic he is in his animations compared to how boring and bland Mario was. But kids fail to realize that these two guys were doing the exact same thing. Just take how distraught they were when they first found out that their banana horde is gone, or how they react when you stand too close to a cliff. These guys have some sort of reaction to a lot of the events that occur in the game, and it barely gets any attention. Like I said, all these animations and movements are rigged from their 3D models, which were super hard to make. Rare did such a great job at making these Kongs feel alive with no dialogue between them at all, and you can still see how close they are with how they interact with one another. But this doesn't just go for the playable guys, since there's other Kongs to see as well. Funky Kong is pretty awesome. I always had a good time whenever I talked to him. Candy Kong had a interesting design, and Cranky Kong, well, if I have been playing, I would have found every... Like, try my hardest, okay? Yeah, I didn't like Cranky Kong that much. As for the bosses, they're pretty bad, honestly. I'm already used to bad 2D platformer bosses, but Rare barely tried making these since they're all bigger versions of common enemies. Plus, they barely have any attacks, are super easy, and all have this same stale background. The bosses here were clearly done last minute and don't represent the game's quality at all. However, this doesn't apply to my boy King K. Rool though. As a Smash fan, it was pretty cool to see where this character actually originated from and how faithful Sakurai was to his moveset. I love how fast and tricky he gets as the fight goes on, and mastering the attack patterns of the cannonballs and crown boomerang felt rewarding. Overall, it's a solid boss with a killer theme that makes it very memorable. And finally, the best thing we can all agree that came from this game is if one of the Kongs get hit by something, instead of falling down or disappearing like any other lame platformer, DK or Diddy runs off the screen as fast as they can. 10 out of 10. Donkey Kong Country feels like a game made ahead of its time. It has some of the best graphics you'll ever see for a 90s game. It's definitely on par visuals wise with Yoshi's Island and Michael Johnson and the Windy City, along with some very cool level themes and controls that can be as fast or slow as you want it to. Even though I have no desire to fully 100% the game because of how overcomplicated and mind-numbing it can be, this is a very solid start for the Country series. Right now, I'm filling up the glass to about 7/10. And with that done, let's move on to the next Country game. So this game right here is one big lie. Despite being called Donkey Kong Country 2, there is no Donkey Kong to be found. What the fuck, Nintendo? So the big difference about this game is the main character was captured by K. Rool, so Diddy Kong now takes center stage and must go save him. Apparently the reason behind this decision was because Diddy Kong ended up being really popular after the release of the first Country game, and Rare wanted to experiment with new ideas. Which is bold of them. You don't see a lot of video game franchises removing a titular character for the entirety of a game. While researching this game, apparently Diddy Kong had a ton of different names before they settled on Diddy, like DK Light, Titchy Kong, and Dicky Kong. I can see why they didn't choose the last one. But not only that, joined by Diddy Kong in this game is his girlfriend Dixie Kong. And like how the differences between the two are much more apparent in this game than Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong's were in the first one. They both had their qualities that made them stand out from each other, but they weren't super apparent. But here, it is clear that Diddy is the more agile Kong between the two, and it is much easier to move and jump between platforms. And with Dixie, her main feature is being able to hover after jumps. I usually tend to use Dixie more between the two just because of that extra assurance when jumping over platforms, since if I do miss a ledge by a bit, I can swiftly hover there at no expense. And there are a lot of sections in this game where you take leaps of faith, so Dixie is a good addition either way. So in terms of new additions to this game, there aren't a lot to mention. And in all honesty, Donkey Kong Country 2 is more of a Mario Galaxy 2, where it has a similar plot, graphics, mechanics, and enemies, but the core level design and gameplay structure is way better than before. Just look at one of the first levels in the game, Top Sail Trouble, where instead of starting in the left side of the level and going all the way to the right, you start from the right side and try to go all the way up. And you slowly climb the deck of the ship with level changes and ropes hanging from side to side, which makes sense because the first world is a pirate ship. And even though graphically the levels look similar to its predecessor, the biomes and settings are much more visually appealing than before. In the prequel, we just got levels and jumps jungles or mines, which are cool settings, but pale in comparison to swimming inside lava, exploring a beehive, a minecart circus, a pirate ship floating on top of green sewage water, and a level comprised entirely of the most gorgeous vine pixel art you've ever seen. And even those typical biomes I mentioned before receive graphical overhauls that make them much more fleshed out than ever before. One thing that stayed pretty true to the original though is the world map, and by stay true I mean it looks awful. I didn't mention this in the last section, but I'm not a big fan of how the world map looks in these two games. I mean, the visuals look pretty okay, but the fact that it's just a PNG where the Kongs are keyframed from spot to spot looks very lazy compared to how detailed the rest of the game is. Here, I literally just recreated it with my shitty editing skills. Another thing I didn't talk about before were the animal buddies. They sort of act as power-ups since they grant you an ability you didn't have access to before, but they're only limited to one level and aren't necessary to beat it. However, now they are tweaked a bit. Not only do we get a plethora of new buddies, but there are tons of levels in this game where you have to play as them for the entirety of it. And these levels are specifically designed to utilize their abilities to the fullest and are unlike anything we've ever seen before. The spider levels are my favorite since I find it a lot of fun to create webs and either shoot them out to make platforms or kill enemies with. And it kinda gives me Cloud Mario vibes. Also, this guy has insane drip. These animal buddy levels might pop up a little bit too much for my taste, but I'm glad that Rare was able to enhance them from what they were before. You even play as Squawks in one of the main boss fights of the game, which, speaking of, fucking finally we get good 2D platformer bosses. It seems Rare was able to listen to the criticism of how mediocre the bosses were from the last game and, get this, actually made them fun to play. There's a crazy flying lava sword and a Kremlin with a big ass club. Even some of the bosses that don't look too interesting design wise all play differently from one another and have attack patterns that are fun but difficult to follow. These are the kind of bosses that feel like they're made with some thought and creativity behind it and not shoehorned in, and make the ending to each area that much more climactic. Here's how you do bosses correctly and not whatever the fuck Mario Wonder was doing. Sorry, I know the game came out a while ago, but that still pisses me off. Now I've been dancing around one topic for this entire video and now feels like the best time to mention it. And if you've played a Donkey Kong game before, you already know what I'm about to say. These games are hard. And not like, oh, you'll die a couple times here and there hard. More like, you'll die on every level a lot of times hard. Random projectiles, very tight spaces to jump through, and just weird BS comes at you in every way. If you're someone who blitzes through levels without any thought, you'll pay the price for it. Like I did. But while I was playing through these games, I questioned what made them so hard compared to other 2D platformers. Again, Mario has all these factors and it is so easy to fly by his levels. And it wasn't until I was playing through DKC2 that it all made sense to me. What makes this series more difficult than your average 2D platformer is the size and speed of your surroundings and how they match or exceed Diddy and Dixie. Look at this level in Mario. There's such a wide view of everything around you and the player has a good look at what's to come in front as well. And those enemies that are in front of you move at such a slow pace that Mario can outrun them with ease. And even if there was an enemy that could catch up to Mario, they are way too small and can be easily avoided with a jump. So Rare looks at all these factors and flip them on their head. Even though the screen is still the same size as Mario World, everything in the game is much bigger and the camera is not as far out, meaning there's a bigger chance for something to come at you and you wouldn't have as much time to react to it. And on top of that, the speed of the enemies is much quicker as well. You could have a head start on them, but because they are so fast and take up so much space, you'll probably get hit in the process. So in these levels, you have to go at a pace where you're not slow enough to get hit by something coming after you, but also don't go too fast and run into something you didn't see. And for me, it was very hard to balance those things, and I died a lot. Oh god, I couldn't tell you how many times I had to use those save states. Oh shit, I mean, how many times I had to redo a level that didn't include me cheating in any way. Yeah. This is especially an issue if you try to find all the collectibles in each level. Collectibles are pretty expected for a platformer at this point, but damn, some of these coins were really hard to find, and I already suffered enough trying to survive through every level already, so usually I wouldn't torture myself more by trying to find all the coins as well, especially when it came to the secret bonus levels. Look, I tried to access all of them, but the amount of death I would experience from these stupid secret entrances just made me skip over some of them entirely. And finally, let's talk about the music. Now you may already know what I'm about to say. It's good. Why should I repeat myself? Well, actually the music in this game is very different from the first, and that's because this soundtrack of Donkey Kong Country 2 is really good. Hold on, let me finish. Not only is the soundtrack a lot bigger than the first one, but in all honesty, it holds some of the best video game songs I've ever heard. Of course, the obvious favorite is Sticker Bush Symphony. Listening to it for the first time, I literally had to stop playing the level just to hear it in its entirety. There's a certain feeling of nostalgia you get from hearing the piece, and even though I didn't play the game as a kid, you sort of just break a bit, hearing the fast yet quiet notes at first, which eventually evolves into a sweeping orchestra. To me, it feels a bit ethereal, and I find it pretty hard not to get emotional whenever I hear it. And it's funny too, since it plays during one of the hardest levels of the game. These stupid fucking barrels are a pain in the ass to transport your way through, and one slip up basically kills you. And when I die, I don't know whether to cry from how hard the level is or cry about how beautiful the music is. So in the end, I just look like this. Fun fact, did you know that Drake sampled a song from this game? Probably, because that's a pretty well-known fact at this point, but funner fact, Childish Gambino also sampled a song as well. That's pretty cool, right? Lastly, we should talk about the final boss a bit, which turns out to be King K. Rool again. But this time he's a pirate. I like how different this one plays compared to the other King K. Rool fight from before, with dodging different types of cannonballs and shooting them right back. I feel like it goes on for a little too long, but the variety of projectiles thrown at you not only keeps you on your feet, but also keeps the boss from being repetitive. But once you take care of that, Donkey Kong is freed and the day is saved. Oh, but look, there's a bonus world. I don't feel like doing the bonus world. Although this game looks identical to the previous one, it's a step up from it in a majority of ways. If Donkey Kong Country 1 was all about experimentation with Silicon graphics and setting a base for how the country games were gonna play, then Donkey Kong Country 2 is an expansion upon it, further building on the groundwork that was there before. Although the game can be a little bit too hard sometimes and the absence of Donkey Kong still makes me sad, it's a good improvement from the first and is a model example of what a sequel should try to be. And for that, it gets a higher score than the original. And hey, this game introduces Beatbox Diddy Kong, which is probably the rawest thing I've ever seen. Where the fuck is Donkey Kong? Alright, I'll accept one game without him, but you're telling me in the Donkey Kong SNES trilogy that has the main dude of the series in the title, he's only there for a third of it. What a shame. Apparently the thing that happened in Country 2 also happened here, where Dixie Kong became the fan favorite, so they booted Diddy Kong out of the game as well in favor of everyone's favorite replacement, Kiddy Kong. Everyone obviously loves him, right? At first glance, I wasn't really a big fan of him. Sure, he played fine. He reminded me a lot of how Donkey Kong was played in the first game, but his only personality trait is being a baby. On a fuck ton of steroids. And his existence, along with me being kinda done with the whole SNES era, made me not super excited to play this game. However, I gotta complete the marathon. And the game doesn't hold too many surprises. Good level design is already a given for the series at this point, and although I would say it's not on the same quality that DK2 was, there's still a decent amount of levels I enjoyed. The level where you ascend a tree all the while you escape a chainsaw made for some great platforming segments, and also made for a sense of dread as you outrun the chainsaw, saw, there's one where the controls are constantly being flipped back and forth, and the one where lightning strikes chase you down was very nerve-wracking, but a cool circumstance that wasn't present in any other Donkey Kong games. At this point, I'm just astonished at how many new ideas the developers are able to introduce in every installment. And for how short of a development period all these games had, I can't praise Rare enough for how they're able to keep the creativity up. It also seems like Rare toned down the overall difficulty in this game as well. Maybe at this point I've gotten more used to the games now, but I don't know. I feel like the speed of the enemies are much slower and there's not as many random surprises that are hidden off screen. All in all, I would say after I finished the first area, I slowly came around to liking this game a lot more. I do think the fatigue of playing 3 games that look very similar to each other got to me at first, but eventually come to appreciate all the differences that make up Country 3, especially when it comes to the bosses, since all of them have a unique way of taking them down that isn't present anywhere else, like in the Snowman boss, which isn't even played like an actual Donkey Kong game, and instead you engage in a snowball fight, a constant back and forth battle where you have to wait out for the perfect opportunity to nail the snowman in the head, all the while you avoid his attacks. And then you have the barrel boss, which is basically just an elaborate game of hot potato. Each boss is able to take advantage of some kind of feature or mechanic in ways that its prequels have never displayed, and I can say with full confidence that DK3 holds the best bosses in the SNES trilogy. With that in mind though, I can also say that this game has the worst music out of the 3. Maybe worst is a big word, because it is hard to top the brilliance of Donkey Kong's 1 and 2 soundtrack, but yeah, there's nothing super notable that stuck out to me while I played this game. Of course, this is due to the fact that David Wise, who composed the soundtrack for the first 2 games, didn't come back to do this one, and it clearly shows. Remember when I was talking about how the first game's music did such a good job at setting the tone for each level, and it almost mimics how the player was feeling during different sections you come across? That's what makes the music so good. Not just being a backdrop and working hand in hand to describe the scenario you're in. And here, there's almost none of that, making every piece forgettable as a result. Which also goes for the animal buddies this time around. Not only getting rid of the fan favorites, but the new ones introduced are pretty lame, since Ellie feels like a worse Rambi, and the little bird guy who I don't remember the name of is just pointless, and feels like it was added just for the sake of having new buddies available. Overall, I'm kinda mixed on that department, and that kinda goes for the world map as well. On one hand, I think it's a good improvement from the last game, being a lot more interactive and you don't just travel in one line everywhere, and I found it neat that in order to access new areas, you must acquire the right new boat parts. Plus, finding hidden secrets and an entire island from exploring a world map is a really cool touch. But at the same time, I hate how the world map doesn't have any stakes or real feel of progress. In Donkey Kong 2, you start at the very bottom of the island, and the more worlds and bosses you beat, the higher you climb up the mountain, until you reach the very top where the final area takes place in a crazy looking airship. And also you get the sense of how much of the game you have left to play. Compare that to here, where every area is scattered around the island and the environments you enter don't feel as though you're evolving from the last. And I had no idea as to how far I was from getting to the end until I entered K. Rool's castle out of nowhere, and I'm like, oh, that's it. I'm the type of guy to love a super climactic build-up to an end of a game, and I loved how the prequels handled them. And compare those ones to this one, where I had zero clue I was in the final world in the first place, and it didn't really sit well with me. But luckily, the final boss of Country 3 is on par with the other 2 games. Here, K. Rool doesn't really have an attack pattern you must memorize, and instead the keys to winning are timing and placement, since you have to be able to unload the barrel at the right time in order to shoot your load onto his backside. God, why did I say it like that? And as the battle goes on, your timing has to become even better, since moving around can become quite difficult as the ground turns into electricity and the platforms start to shift. In general, I really like King K. Rool and the Kremlings as villains. He gives off great Bowser vibes, since he can be intimidating and a good foil to the Kongs, but also has a fun personality you can't help but love. And unlike Bowser, his boss fights are quite challenging, but also unique in all 3 entries. Too bad he fucking died after this game. And so Donkey Kong and Diddy are saved again. And for the most part, I can understand why Donkey Kong Country 3 is the least popular of all the country games. However, there's still a lot of good things going for it. The level design is still top notch and it introduces some of the best bosses as of yet. And you can still see how passionate the developers are for a series even after such a long time. However, there are some not so stellar things to the game, like the music and Kiddy Kong, that make it inferior to the second and probably a little bit worse than the first one. However, that could maybe change with a future playthrough. For that though, I'm gonna fill the glass to a little bit less than what I gave to the first game. And with that done, we can finally move on to the modern day of Donkey Kong,
which still came out 14 years ago.
so maybe modern is a bit of a stretch. So right off the bat, one of my favorite things about Donkey Kong Country Returns is its name. Obviously, the whole Returns part alludes to how this is the first Donkey Kong Country game in such a long time, ever since Rare left Nintendo and Retro Studios picked it up. But that's not all though. Not only does the series come back, but Donkey Kong himself is also back. Since, again, Donkey Kong wasn't present for the last 2 games. So when you see the big guy playable for the first time in forever, you can tell that we are so back. And once you hear that incredible remake of Jungle Hijinks with graphics that once again look ahead of its time, you can tell that, oh, we are so fucking back. This game through and through is a love letter to all the Donkey Kong fans that waited so long for another installment, but also modernizes the gameplay so new players wouldn't feel alienated by it. Here I felt much more comfortable controlling Donkey Kong than ever before. Granted, this is because of the original games. While they're still good to control, they're still on very old hardware, so automatically some aspects of the gameplay wouldn't age as well. But even then, I feel like Donkey Kong here is much more smooth and flexible. There isn't that much new in terms of your moveset, but just like the older games, this series prides itself in perfecting the classic 2D platformer moveset instead of innovating it. Because man, it has never felt better to do a jumping roll dash than before, and I love the satisfaction I get from perfecting a jump and getting a collectible out of it. But that's not to say that the new moves added to this game aren't great as well. His ground pound move is a good way of stunning enemies and also a fun way to find secrets. And the jetpack hover almost makes me believe that the developers of Donkey Kong aren't the reincarnation of the devil, because adding such a user-friendly feature goes a long way in making levels more fun and less bullshit. And this move relates to how Donkey Kong Returns does something completely different from the SNES trilogy. Before, you had to manually switch between Kongs in order to use their special abilities. But here, once you have Diddy Kong, he will always act as support as he rides on your back. And instead of having his own moveset you had to manually access, Donkey Kong can just utilize Diddy whenever he wants to. And personally, I love this change. It always felt like switching between partners to do a task was disrupting the rhythm of the gameplay, so combining the 2 characters into one was definitely the right way of modernizing the gameplay. So the moveset seems pretty perfect to me. I know a lot of fans hated how Retro had to shove the motion controls down our throats and force players to awkwardly use the rear remote to perform some moves, but personally, I didn't have a problem with that since I emulated the played the 3DS version of this game. From what I've seen, the 3DS version is the ideal way to play this game. Even though graphically it's not as impressive, you gain access to a couple of new levels not native to the Wii version, and you even have an extra heart. And overall, the game is actually very generous. Not only do you get all these perks I mentioned before, but this game also has an item shop, where you can buy a bunch of, I'll say, handicaps to help you on your journey, which includes an extra heart, invincibility, and even a balloon that will save you from falling off a cliff. And I appreciate that Retro went out of their way to help new players, because it makes it all the more funny when levels turn into this. Huh, this game is actually not that hard. It's pretty easy. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, fuck, go, shit, what is happening? Yeah, don't worry, this game is still a bitch to play. So although the first 2 worlds or so are pretty easy, Donkey Kong Country Returns proves to have a very steep but incredible difficulty curve, where early on, the game lets you have a chance to figure out their surroundings and gives you lots of time to plan what actions you're gonna do next. But in later parts of the game, there will be lots of instances that don't give you that time of day, and you'll have to react react to oncoming enemies and projectiles with 0 time to process your next move. For example, take this platforming section from a level in World 1. It's nothing super special. There's no danger coming for you from below or up ahead, and if you mess up, it doesn't matter, since you'll most likely fall onto another platform. Again, it's nothing out of the ordinary, and it's a very chill section. And then you compare that to whatever bullshit you gotta do here, since now you gotta make these very precise jumps, and if you miss by just a smidge, you die. But also you gotta avoid these jumping fire guys that are all over the place, and if you hit one, you'll most likely die. And while you gotta worry about all this stuff, the volcano beneath you is erupting, so if you happen to make one mistake and fall off, you'll fucking die. This game is able to hold your hand in one moment and then push you off a cliff in the next, and that's precisely why I love it. It's something I've always wished Mario games would do. And even though there's hard levels here and there, 95% of Mario games never have that crazy difficulty curve that Returns has. Everything I've seen so far really impressed me. The fact that Retro Studios, a company that had no affiliations to Rare, was able to recreate the magic of the original games is pretty amazing. But it's not because they just copy and pasted it. No, Retro was able to expand on the classic level design by incorporating the background to all of these levels. Typically with Donkey Kong games, the background doesn't really play a role into anything. It looks pretty, but aside from that one snowman boss, there's nothing noteworthy to write home about. But here, Retro completely changes that and makes the background essential. You'll often see some kind of creature or presence lurking there, and it's not just for show. Like this one octopus guy early on in 2-5 sort of just stalks you for the majority of it until he starts attacking you midway, making him a threat. Or in this other level, you gotta pay attention to what's in front of you, as this mole guy will start to throw stuff at you. Retro did such a good job of having no wasted space when it came to making returns that this form of level design even made its way into a stage in Smash 4. The stage was pretty shit though, I never liked it. However, not all these levels are winners though, because this method also makes for my least favorite part of the game, which are the rocket barrel and minecart levels. I always love playing through the minecart levels in past games, but here they just feel way too fast and stressful. You have to be so goddamn precise with all your jumps, and since the screen can be too small, you'll find yourself constantly falling off or inputting the wrong jump. This especially applies to the rocket barrel levels as well, since controlling them can feel kind of wonky at times, and trying to dodge all the bullshit coming towards you feels impossible with the small windows of opportunity you're given. But by far the worst parts of these levels is how frail you are, because if you do run into any object, no matter how much HP you have, you will die. These levels can be so painful to get through, because you're constantly moving around and have no time for breaks, so the fact that the developers make it even harder on you now is heartbreaking. But that's enough of me complaining, so let's move on to my favorite part of Donkey Kong Country Returns, which happens to be the minecart and rocket barrel levels. Yeah, no, I'm serious. Unironically, whenever these levels would pop up, I got very worried and excited at the exact same time. Don't get me wrong, all the flaws I said before still apply, but these levels are so addicting that whenever I died on them, it only invigorated me to try it again and beat it. They have a weird Cuphead boss feel to them, where you know you'll rage a ton since there'll be so many things coming at you at once, but whenever you play these levels, you can feel the love and passion that went into designing them. My all-time favorite level in this game is 4-5 Crowded Cavern, which starts off with Donkey Kong waking up a bunch of bats who will then swarm at you, and for the entirety of the level, you're constantly outrunning and maneuvering around the bats. It is very hard to fully memorize where all the bats are coming from and how fast or slow some of them might turn out to be, but that's what makes it fun. And seeing all the little things, like the bat swooping from the background to the foreground and the giant bat trying to chase you down, gives these levels a cinematic feel to them. And just like Cuphead, yeah, this level took me a long time to beat, but when I did, I can return to it and beat it more easily, and only then I can truly take in how much polish went into designing them, since I'm no longer cursing profusely when I play it. And also because the rocket barrel levels have the best music in the game by far. Just listen to this. So I'm glad that Retro was able to make a banger soundtrack without the genius of David Wise. And now it seems like as good of a time as ever to mention the bosses. And if you boil it down, yeah, they all result in you trying to find the perfect moment to jump on their head, but the process to get there is wildly different from one another. The first two bosses seem a little bit too easy since they are pretty slow, and their attacks can be easily dodged, but by the time you get to the third boss, the pace will quickly build up, and your opportunities for dishing out damage becomes more obscure. Moltrain and the weird dragon boss are especially hard since they make use of the setting as well, and you more so have to fight the surroundings more than you fight the enemy because of how easy it is to fall off these little platforms. These two specifically really angered me, which is why the ending of it was all the more satisfying. So the whole plot of the game is defeating these little tiki guys who take control of all the animals on the island, which includes the bosses. And at the end of every boss, the tikis pop out of them and Donkey Kong goes in and does a super epic monkey punch combo. I don't know if that's the name of the move, but I'm calling it that anyways. And after all the stress and anger you went through fighting the boss and the world they reside in, you can go ahead and take all the anger out and mash these tikis into oblivion. And god is it satisfying every time. And there's no real intricate reason as to why that is, but it doesn't matter. It is fun, and I want every game I play from now on to have a super epic monkey punch combo in it. So again, bosses are a good time, and now that I defeated all of them, it's time to take out the final boss. And after a pretty sweet build up to the top of the mountain, we face the leader of the Tiki tribe, Tiki Tong. And it's a good boss, don't get me wrong. However, it was ruined for me a bit in the weirdest way possible, because a couple of days before I played it, I saw a tweet that said something along the lines of, wow, Nintendo does a lot of floating head and hand bosses. And I was like, yeah, right, what a stupid claim. And then I saw this thing, and the entire time I was playing it, I kept thinking about all the other floating head and hand bosses, and there are a lot. Bouldergeist, Knuckletech, DJ Octavio, Bongo Bongo, Magalore, Godon, iRock, Andross, Master Hand. Even fucking Bowser has his own version. So like, the boss is still good. It's not super easy, and there's a lot of interesting attack patterns to follow. Although the loss of King K. Rool is still felt, it ends on a super high note because it has one of the coolest ending sequences I've ever seen. God, I love Donkey Kong Country Returns. I can appreciate the original SNES trilogy for how innovative and creative they were for when they came out, but they don't hold a candle to how Retro brought the series back. It was able to smooth out all the inconsistencies that were present before and built upon it, and made the already fantastic level design even better. Although some of the miscellaneous aspects of Donkey Kong aren't here, like the lack of subtle world building and interactivity with other Kongs, the core gameplay couldn't have been any better. And it's here I can fully grasp at what makes the series so special. With that being said, it's gonna rank above the other three on the glass. And never more in my life have I wanted to play a sequel more than now. So here's a live reenactment of what happened when I first finished Donkey Kong Country Returns. That was fun. Alright, round 2. Now, I had the opportunity to play this game much earlier in my life. Christmas 2014, my parents gave me the option to buy one Wii U game, and I boiled it down to Tropical Freeze or Skylanders Trap Team. Can you guess what game I ended up choosing? So now that I finally have my hands on this game now, I was very interested to see if Retro can go ahead and top a near perfect platformer, and also to see if I made the wrong decision back then. So the plot is pretty simple. After Donkey Kong's birthday gets ruined by the Snowmads, I know, what fucking assholes, DK and his crew must head out to try and claim back his island from this intimidating looking walrus. And I guess one category that's already better than its prequel is the graphics. Witnessing that gorgeous opening cutscene and seeing every strand of Donkey Kong's body hair stand out is incredible. And then the environments you explore are jam-packed with crazy cinematics and little details that 90% of players would never notice but are still there anyways. Oh god, this game is so good. It is by far one of the best looking games on the Switch that also happens seems to predate the Switch. Now, in terms of how different this game is compared to Returns, there isn't too much to talk about. Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong are virtually the same in how they control, but now we got more playable characters to aid us on our journey, being Dixie Kong and Cranky Kong. Dixie Kong is able to give you a mid-air double jump, and Cranky Kong, while a bit trickier to control, can use his stick to make you jump higher and avoid spiky flooring. Overall, I tried to use all three support Kongs equally, and there are specific levels that are tailor-made for the use of one specific Kong, but out of the three, I feel like Dixie Kong is the most useful. A double jump in platformers always make tasks much easier no matter the situation, and it makes for getting collectibles and reaching tall heights much easier. However, the most fun one to use is Cranky. I know there's some crazy speedrun stats you can pull off with him, and I'm also happy that Cranky finally gets time to shine in the spotlight and not just bully you like in all the other games. Aside from the new playable characters though, the gameplay itself isn't anything super new or surprising. Levels are still completed in the same way, and it has the same format that Returns had, but this isn't a bad thing though. Just like how its prequel was able to evolve the original SNES format, Tropical Freeze takes what was established in Donkey Kong Returns and goes absolutely bananas with it. Instead of exploring a singular island like all the prequels, in this one, each area takes place on its own. And once you defeat the end boss, you move on to the next island until you get back to DK's island. This is able to make the game a lot more fleshed out, since now we're able to have these expansive islands with their own themes and environments to it. But of course, the creativity of the map design doesn't hold a candle to how amazing the level design is. In the first world alone, you have levels where you have to bust yourself out of a plane, and in the next one, ride down a waterfall into a huge pool of water, explore a mechanical wasteland, barrel your way through a gigantic forest, and even infiltrate ships of the enemy. Each world can take you to so many different places and always keep it fresh, but there is also the fact that I just lied. And all those places I just mentioned all take place in one singular level. All this stuff happens in a sequence in a mere 5-minute level, and at no point does anything feel disconnected or out of place. This is the kind of thing I praised Mario Wonder for, and it boggles my mind that Tropical Freeze was able to pull off all this stuff 10 years earlier than Mario did. But Tropical Freeze also has the advantage of being a 2.5D game. As in, even though both of these games are played in a 2D plane, in Tropical Freeze, all the objects and surroundings are 3D renders. So during multiple points in this game, it's able to do stuff like this. This game I'm playing right now, it's barely even a 2D platformer anymore. The game is able to switch perspectives like nothing and never made it feel out of place. It's literally in a league of its own at this point. It's also no surprise how good the soundtrack is as well. I've told you this so many times already, but Tropical Freeze does something really cool with the music this time around. And not only is David Wise back to producing the music, but the music plays a role in how the levels will operate as well. You'll find platforms that are moving along to the beat of the music, and if you time your jumps and your moves to how the song is playing, it will make levels all the more easier. I love how natural this all feels for the DK series as well, since music has always played such a big role in what makes the series so great, and now that it doesn't just act as a backdrop, it makes the tracks all the more memorable. So just like in Donkey Kong Country Returns, Retro didn't waste any space when it came to the level design. Yet again, it takes advantage of the foreground and background to create such dynamic and awe-inspiring courses. And just like last time, the minecart and rocket barrel levels are great examples of this. Here's some of my favorite sequences. The whole looping section where you're going down a tree, this gear that's chasing after you, that is simultaneously cutting up the tracks to create obstacles that go in front of you, and a goddamn cheese wheel that is sent from the background to the foreground. So many things are happening all around you, yet you'll almost never notice these things because you're so focused on what's happening in front of you, and that's okay. Retro does not want you to dwell on the little details. Even though adding all those insane visuals probably takes them a lot more time to develop than any other 2D platformer, they don't draw attention to those factors, which is not only pretty humble of them, but lets you appreciate their skills that much more. There's even thematic storytelling between levels as well. World 5 specifically shows you an in-depth tutorial on how to make popsicles. The first level is all about machines picking fruits off a tree. In the second level, we see the fruits are being chopped, and then are made into jello, and then finally are frozen into popsicles, and yes, I did steal those from Donkey's video. Sorry, I just found it really cool and would work well in my video.
Please don't be mad at me.
Not to mention the collectibles and bonus areas are much more easy to find than before. This also applies to returns, but most Kong pieces are usually out in the open. And as for the new collectible puzzle pieces, they aren't super hard to find either, usually being hidden in a plant or some secret space in the wall, but not the bullshit kind. Here, if you see a suspicious looking wall, that most definitely leads to a bonus area. Now there is one problem I have with this game, but it's not really a criticism, and more so me being kind of petty. And it's the fact for a game called Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, emphasis on the freeze, there isn't a lot of freezing in this game. Now, I wouldn't want every level in this game to be snow or ice themed. That would be a mess. But I would have liked to see more of how the snowmads change the islands of the game. I was thinking that every world would start off normal, and slowly as you progress through all the courses, some snowy aspects start to appear. Or maybe with all the areas you go to, the islands become more and more winter themed. But it doesn't, and the game only starts to use its winter aesthetic once you reach the last level of the 5th world. And for a series that does like to pay a lot of attention to the little details and changes, I thought they'd play around with the idea more. Now, something I gotta say about the bosses this time around is that they're very misleading. I'll use the polar bear boss as an example. His whole shtick is pretty mediocre at first. Just wait till he throws his sledgehammer and jump on his head. And at first I thought, oh, this is really simple. But the dude gets very crafty. Suddenly he starts throwing all these tall ass ice cubes at you, and creates ice shards, and even shoots ice missiles at you. And as the attacks get faster, your window of opportunity gets slimmer. And oh, look at that, I lost 10 lives trying to beat it. Every boss's dynamic changes heavily throughout their runtime. By the last phase, it barely resembles what it was before. And that's mostly thanks to how much hits it takes to kill each boss, and how much other enemies and surroundings are able to vastly change how the boss functions. But these bosses are able to go by a lot quicker if you take more risks. Take the pufferfish boss here. Normally, you have to wait it out until it starts moving all over the place to land a hit on it. But if you're a good video gamer like me, God damn it, why did I say that? You notice that if you try to hit the mini pufferfish into the bigger one, it also counts as a hit. But it's much harder to land, and if you make one wrong move, you end up bumping into the spikes. Basically, the game awards you for your creativity, and this type of mechanic is found all throughout the game, especially during the last stretch. Speaking of which, let's talk about that. So after you overcome all the other bosses and ascend your now frozen island up to the peak, you're met with the leader of the Snowmads, Lord Frederick. Yeah, I know, I was also terrified when I first heard his name. To be honest, looking at the mysterious figure we saw at the start of the game, I thought he looked a lot more intimidating, but he kinda just ends up having a beer belly. But aside from that, Lord Frederick is still a really good send-off. I like how the final boss of this game and Returns are a little antithetical from one another, where the Tiki boss fight took place in the top of the volcano, while this one is set at the bottom of the crater. It also has a fun callback to the Snowman boss in Donkey Kong 3, and overall, it's great for all the same reasons that made the regular bosses great as well. I especially love how Frederick constantly changes the floor to ice, stone, or straight up lava, which made it all the more difficult to get my timing down for his attacks, since the only way you can damage him is timing the perfect jump where you avoid his ram move and pound him on his back. But the problem was, I kept either jumping over him or dodging and then getting obliterated when he comes back at me. And not gonna lie, this really got to me. God, I endured so much pain during this marathon, and I wanted to be done with it. But I knew it was gonna be all the more satisfying when I eventually do beat his ass and then deal out the most brutal, super epic monkey punch combo of them all. And as Donkey Kong revs up his punch one final time, I anticipated it too quickly and I completely butchered it. I was pretty sad about that. But I finally beat the game! And even though it's hard to top the, you know, punching the moon onto the surface of the earth thing, I was still happy with the final cutscene. And apparently, Retro was as well, to the point where that was our final Donkey Kong Country game we ever got. This February is going to be the game's 10th anniversary, and God, that is so sad. I had the opportunity to play it all the way back then when my parents asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and instead of playing a modern masterpiece, I ended up asking for fucking Skylanders. Tropical Freeze is a top 3 2D platformer experience of all time. I thought Wonder was the peak of the mountain, I really did, but I'm so surprised that Retro was able to perfect the 2D platformer genre way before Wonder came out. And I'm also surprised to see how many aspects of Wonder were inspired by the Donkey Kong series, like seamless recovery times, unique visual designs, the badge system, kinda. As of now, I still think I prefer Mario Wonder between the two, since I've just been a bigger Mario fan all my life, but damn is this game close to it in quality. And for that fact alone, Tropical Freeze is being filled extremely close to the top of the glass. Also, yes, I did play through Funky Mode. It was cool, I guess. Or should I say, no. Never mind. I had a very interesting time with the Donkey Kong Country series. I can tell you with full confidence that the SNES trilogy was ahead of its time, with unprecedented graphics, level design better than most platformers now, and music that will forever stand the test of time. But I never started to be obsessed with the series until I got to Returns and Tropical Freeze, which was able to recontextualize and enhance the mechanics from before, and overall stand out as an absolute masterclass in a genre that was getting stale at the time they came out. And despite selling very well, we haven't heard a word about the future of the series. And there's no real good ending for this video. Retro's been putting all their hard work into Metroid Prime 4, and unless Nintendo wants to hand the series to another new studio again,
We're probably not gonna see the series for a while.
so in the meantime, I guess I'll go ahead and listen to the entire soundtrack now, because god damn, the music is just so good. Speaking of music, we should probably check on how my friend's doing right now. Oh dear god.